is, I think so, if I may, my question is that if you watch television, you are bombarded with the problem, say, of the Jews, the Holocaust, and I'm just bringing the Jews as example because it's the other very good example of genocide and a nation that has survived, and how they've survived. You have no choice, it's there. For us, somebody has to be interested to go and look for it. That's my point.
Can I answer that one very briefly? You see, we have to remember the Holocaust was in the heart of Europe, it's on the conscience of Europe. So therefore, in the European media, a lot more. What happened to the Armenians, it's not in the consciousness.
We have to bring it to the consciousness, that's what I'm saying.
Fine.
But also you pointed, Vaskian pointed out a website to me, just been...
Hushamadian is a very good website, if you're aware of it, yeah. But also, really quickly, I know there's a question there, is that, for example, Virgin's way of carrying on, she's basically continuing a living tradition, and it keeps on moving, and every time she tells the stories, and she sings the songs, etc., it's living again, it keeps on continuing, whereas David and I come from a completely different background. It's academic research, and the aim of that is to get the PhDs and then basically publish books and do more research and curate exhibitions and publish. So that's the whole thing. But there's a lot of different kind of work being carried out by lots of different people.
Sorry, there was a question there. Yes.
I wondered what you all thought about what's been happening in the last 12 months in Turkey, or even earlier really, with young Turkish artists and young Turkish hipsters visiting Armenia because they think it's groovy, and coming back and making art about it. And also I was given at least 3 different separate tours of Gezi Park by my Armenian friends, my Turkish friends, my Jewish friends, and also Kurdish activists. And obviously one of the most important things about that space is that the Ottoman barracks, from which, in fact, the first right-wing coup was launched a century ago, and which the present government is trying to reconstruct in the form of kitsch, which is very interesting to me as someone who's half Jewish and half Irish and has to confront continually the ritualization of the Holocaust and the kitschification of all our memories and into something which doesn't actually resemble the fresh and real memories in all their oddity. But one of the most important things was that was really an Armenian graveyard before it was an Ottoman barracks. And the young Turkish people who found that out found it exciting and important. And it may be, some people might say, well, it took them a long time to find that out, but they did find it out, and there does seem to have been a mixing and an opening and lots of good things happening. And these forums are going on. The Gezi Forum, I believe there's one in London, but I don't know how to find it. And also, I just wanted to say that it's very inspiring to me, coming from, Hungarian Jewish background on one side, that the younger generation seem to be so open in Turkey to this mixing, whereas in Eastern Europe and in Central Europe it's being swept by this wave of nationalism and racism. Where the younger people tend to be more fierce than the older ones. And in Turkey, there seems to be something different going on. I don't want to be over-optimistic, but it does seem very exciting potentially.
Do you think that's to do with which generation it is, since the atrocities,
Possibly, because the other thing that's very important is for the perpetrator generation to die out, and then people feel less shamed to say what happened.
I think it's really positive that the new generation is asking questions and asking lots of questions, and I think what you described, I see it quite positively, cautiously positively, because you never know what the backlash is going to be.
One of the most interesting papers I heard was at a conference in November, and it was the first paper I ever heard where she was an academic who described the torture of an Islamized Armenian woman called Sarah, and then at the end she said, "It was my family that perpetrated all these. It was for me the first time I heard it in Turkey being actually admitted publicly that one's family was a perpetrator. So therefore, I think it is a bit late, yes, but there is hope. And we as diaspora Armenians, we should be as supportive of this little beginning movement.
I would like to make also one comment. I don't have any particular question, but one thing that I'm really feeling encouraged when I see not only Armenian Institute, but now we have the discussions on Ottoman part of our history is becoming very active, and I think it's a very positive thing, because what was happening in past almost 100 years, I mean, Armenia was Sovietized and there was a censorship and only very selective things could go through these, ways and eventually appear in a form of history, book, literature, art, or anything. And the other part was in diaspora, when anything related to Turkey was a taboo. So basically, what we were basically living, as your title is, in an imagined, kind of transcendent country, which was Western Armenia, but it was not a country. That's why when we started to also recognize that we were not only Armenians and we were not only Western Armenians, but we were also Ottoman Armenians, that brings a sense also not only ownership of what we lost in Western Armenia, but we lost also in the whole Ottoman Empire, to the empire that Armenians contributed significantly from the time of its birth till the time of its collapse. And I think that with these kind of stories slowly emerging, and that shows Armenian contribution to the Ottoman painting, to the Ottoman music, to the Ottoman theater, to the anything Ottoman, rather than the way we were thinking in the very narrowly Western Armenian art, Western Armenian poetry, Western Armenian everything, but which was maybe Western Armenia for us, but for the rest of the world it was Ottoman. That's why maybe that was also a question, that why we couldn't sell that product, because nobody is interested in Western Armenian, unfortunately, let's face that reality. But if you manage to present it that Armenian but Ottoman, then that raises opens the eyes, and I think that with these kind of projects, and we will basically be able to widen the scope of the issue, and also bring very new, interesting developments.
Yes, Annie.
Very small comment. We have to remember that the Ottoman history and details and the way it is, even in Turkey, it's a new movement. During the Republic, from 1923, discussing the Ottoman Empire or anything Ottoman was considered backward, i.e. anything Western was right, but discussing the Ottoman Empire, anything Ottoman was not the done thing. Plus there was the change of the alphabet, which cut a lot of Turkish people, including Armenians who lived in the Ottoman Empire, from their roots of the culture.
That's a very, very important point. And in this, looking back at the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, it didn't start until the late 1990s, almost. So it is very important to note that until then there was almost a complete amnesia in Turkey as well about the history of the Ottoman Empire. Well, there was the selective, of course, history of the Ottoman Empire. But
and this is the case for many post-Ottoman states.
Absolutely.
Separating themselves.
That's exactly what I wanted to say. And one of the problems in academia was that Turkish and Armenian, but not just Armenian, also Greek, etc., lived in completely separate universes. They didn't really talk to each other at all. So my interest was, for example, when I'm looking at the Imperial Fine Arts School in Istanbul, it was founded in 1882. Students were actually Armenians. Okay, there were Muslim students, there were Greek students, there were Levantine students, etc. My question is that when these students leave this school, the Imperial Fine Arts Academy, does suddenly the Armenian student end up painting Armenian paintings, and then the Turkish student paints Turkish paintings, and the Greek paints Greek paintings? I mean, it's absurd. They actually lived and they worked within the same environment. They knew each other. So intellectually, there were all sorts of exchanges. So it is completely artificial to separate all these in little sort of nation states, Turkey, Armenia, Greece, Bulgaria, etc., and suddenly claim their own and just remove them from the context in which they actually operated. And I think that's a very important question. But that's changing slowly. It has started to change. So,
any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I'm Turkish,
Okay.
but I do have ethnic backgrounds. I mean, my mother, she's Bulgarian, but she claims to be Turkish, and my father is Iraqi Ottoman from Kirkuk, but he claims to be Turkish as well. But I believe my father's got more than that. He probably has a Cappadocian Greek or Armenian. I mean, when I speak Armenian, some people claim I have a very good accent. So that's a good indication that I might have some sort of Armenian roots in me as well.
Yes.
My question is that have any of these paintings or literature mentioned anything about Turkification? Because there are various ethnic groups in Turkey, but unfortunately many of them have been Turkified. And I can see Turkish people's faces today that they look so much like Greeks, Armenians, Kurdish. About Kurdish as well, so many of them have Turkish names, full Turkish names, and I haven't even met any Kurdish person at all with a Kurdish name from Turkey, and this sort of problem is still happening now in Turkey, and according to some sources, around 5 million or more Turkish people are starting to recognise their Armenian and Greek roots, and it's quite fascinating, and it's really important for these people to recognise who they truly are. So have they mentioned anything about Turkification at all? Because it's getting ridiculous now to see many of these people. I mean, I don't consider Turkey to be a Turkic nation. The real Turkic nation would be Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan. They're the real Turks, whereas people in Turkey are not truly Turkic or Turks at all, really. Yeah, I'm sorry if I offended anyone, but it's what
May I try and answer the young man's
Yes.
question? I think this is very interesting because in the 60s, when I visited Istanbul with my parents, we certainly noticed that Armenians went by their names without the ending, the IAN at the end. They, instead of saying Minasyane or Minas, or in my mother's maiden name, Tekeryan, was Teker. And this is how they introduced each other. It was to make themselves look like full modern Turkish citizens. And this is probably a phenomenon that also existed within the Kurdish communities. But it's interesting that there is a melting pot, because in one branch of my family, a grand aunt and her husband did become Muslim, and their descendants were modern day Turkish citizens. And we visited our uncles, who were first cousins of my father, and they spoke in Turkish to each other. And so it is interesting that, yes, perhaps Turkey is more of a melting pot because of this, and maybe the more richer and more interesting. The Anatolian Plateau was certainly a crossroads. Not only the Turks, we had the Mongols, we had the Arabs who came in and imposed taxation on us. I think we were one nation that did not build fortresses and so on, that allowed these people to come in, and we blended with them. We were very cosmopolitan from the very beginning, from a very positive note.
I mean, even my surname does sound Armenian, but I just don't have Yan at the end, which is correct Yan. But I don't have the Yan.
Yes.
So does my friend here as well. Well, yeah, his surname is Horus, but there's an Armenian surname called Horusian, but he just doesn't have a young at the end. And, you know,
I mean,
it could be possible that.
I'm a Turkish Cypriot, so I don't know, I might be a Turkified Armenian. That's what I'm trying to look for now.
It's quite important for many young, generally for Turkish people now in Turkey to know their roots. For what I see now, there's a lot of ultra-nationalism going on, and because of all this, it's not really improving relationships with their neighbours, such as Greece and Armenia and all that, and you know, it's causing a lot of problem for the people themselves. And to be honest, I'm still seeing some parts of Turkey quite chaotic.
But the changing of names, just to put it into the wider global context, is something that happens everywhere. So it happens in America, it happens here. Lots of Armenians or Turks or whatever, when they emigrate to the United States, they will change their surname. They will cut something out in order to make it easier to be communicated. So that's something that's not uncommon in a way to have that. But going back to the idea of the changing religions, I mean, yes, I mean, from my understanding is that it was common, quite a common practice amongst all the different religious minorities, and that was one of the reasons was were financial, legal, etc. But again, as you pointed out, it didn't create frictions between the family members.
Yeah, my understanding was that during the Holocaust, families did do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Temporarily, and then when the situation changed and Ataturk came in, and his mother is supposedly Greek. You know,
Exactly.
He's not ethnically 100% Turk himself. That these people then converted back to Christianity, but this particular grand aunt's family decided they wanted to be Muslim going forward. So.
When I was talking about sort of Turkification of historiography, really what I was really trying to say is that people forget what a complex society the Ottoman Empire was, and they basically try to reduce everything into little sort of narrow sort of nationalist narratives. So in 1923 you have the founding of the Turkish Republic, and they are in need of a Turkish art history. So in a way, Ottoman art history becomes Turkish art history. So any names somehow that do not fit into that are left out. They're sort of left outside history. When Armenians basically decide to write an Armenian art history, they basically select a certain number of artists, mostly Russian Armenian or Soviet Armenian, and construct an equally sort of fictitious art history. The Greeks do exactly the same thing, Bulgarian art history. So what I'm actually calling for is really for all these people to basically brought together and the proper context, the complexity of it to be examined, and get rid of this sort of reductive, artificial narrowness, and hopefully it's happening.
Exactly.
I think that when you presented the paint, you know, especially the Ottoman painters, artists, that was maybe the part of our heritage that suffered the most, because, for example, I mean, all Ottoman Armenian writers rightly found their place in Armenian in the same Soviet or Armenian.
Not all of them. Not all of them. There was a very no. I will disagree with you. There was a very selective incorporation of certain Western Armenian writers in Soviet literary historiography.
What I want to say that the heritage, what they created, that was thanks to why it happened, because what they created, it was preserved and passed to us. But in case of as you rightly mentioned, in case of the paintings, they are gone.
They're gone. We don't know where they are. We don't know where they are. So it really is detective work. You need to, carry out detective work too.
Also, to claim the ownership, to incorporate them. It's much harder. You can't incorporate to your history books or art books something that doesn't exist, basically. And that's one of the reasons that Ottoman Ottoman artists are neglected, rather than in comparison to the architects or writers or even composers.
On this point, it's not so much that they don't exist, it's just that they perhaps haven't been identified properly. Because Maida Saris, who was the Armenian editor in Agos, has produced 2 books. One of them is the Armenian painters of Constantinople, and the other one is the Greek painters of Constantinople. The reason she did the 2 is because when she was researching Armenian painters in Topkapi and other collections, but mainly in Topkapi, she found that actually a lot of the painters, they were categorized and the names had been confused. So sometimes she would see an Armenian painter and actually he was a Greek painter. And so what's happened is that she discovered a whole lot of paintings that nobody knew or had identified, and she tried to separate them out, and she produced these 2 books, and it's remarkable the work that she's done. So the work exists. In the case of writing, it's clear because they wrote in Armenian, so that was easy to identify, but in the case of painting, it's a whole different story. And I think a lot of the work is there, like the architecture and so forth, which I've come across. And it's not described as Armenian. In fact, the opposite happens. It has to be described as Ottoman or Turkish. And the author disappears. We don't know who built it. Like Sinan has been completely Turkified.
The interesting thing, though, I mean, when you mentioned Maida Saris' book on the Armenians, first of all, the Armenian artists of the Ottoman Empire, actually the Turkish or Muslim artists of the late Ottoman period have not been properly looked at either. It's not just the Armenians. But in terms of the Armenian artists, they haven't really been looked at by art historians. Maida Saris is a journalist, and she's produced a book. But more important, she's doing groundwork, which is very, very useful. But even more important than Maida Saris' work is a 2-volume book by Garo Kukman that was published in 2004, and it lists Ottoman Armenian painters, and about 350 of them, if I'm not mistaken, 1 or 2 images from each painter, which is fantastic because then it actually makes it much easier for people like us.
Identify the styles.
Well, he's basically put in, just like Maida Saris, they've basically put in amateurs, professionals, anyone with any kind of sort of whatever painting they could actually find, which is really, really useful for us because then we can actually go there and sort of look at the work and try and sort of understand exactly what it is that they're actually doing. So, and before 2000, there was only 1 book published in Vienna by a priest in Armenian on the collection of paintings that they had in Vienna, and in 1959 in Cairo in French by Only Gavadisyan, Armenian painters, but that was a very, very general work. Otherwise, it doesn't really exist. There were a couple of Soviet Armenian publications, but again, they were in Armenian, so not particularly accessible to the wider academic.
How about Venice? In Venice, maybe?
No, they have never published anything on art history.
They probably have archives.
They have archives. They do have archives. They have a wonderful collection of paintings, which is very useful for both Ottoman art history and Armenian art history. They're certainly not mutually exclusive.
But this whole business of identifying images is huge and it's fraught. Because, for instance, when you think of the exhibition on My Dear Brother, the man who collected those postcards started doing it. A young boy, 14, 15 years old, goes to markets and he sees postcards with some Armenian inscription on the back or some Armenian word or something that's Armenian, and he buys them. And he starts showing them to his mother, who's Armenian. And she says, "Oh, thank you for the present." He keeps buying more and more. He amasses a huge collection. When that collection is finally exhibited in Constantinople, it created an absolute uproar, because a lot of people said that actually they hadn't seen the costumes, they hadn't seen how people looked in the Ottoman Empire. And these Armenian photographers, and by the way, when the camera came to Constantinople, they called it the Armenian gadget, because it was Armenians who brought it there. These pictures had never been seen before, and they hadn't been seen publicly.
So the stuff is coming out into the open, and it's being identified in the open. And this is the big change, really.
Absolutely, finding them is really, really important.
Yes.
I saw an image published in a 1912 Armenian language almanac from Constantinople by Teotic. It's a yearbook that was published every year, and there was a painting. There was a black and white, grainy reproduction of this painting that was published in there, and I just stopped and I just thought, all the Armenian realist texts that I actually studied at school, I was lucky enough to go to an Armenian language school in the diaspora until I was 18, so I'm fluent in Western Armenian. So I thought, Kriko Zohrab, Alpi Aryan, all these writers, sort of, I could really, really see them in that particular painting, and it took me 18 months to find the painting in the entrance hall of this old Kodja in Paris, and I kept on going and sort of asking him, and he wouldn't sort of let me, and eventually he did let me into his house, because he was 90 years old, he didn't really trust me. What do you want? Are you going to make money out of this, etc. I said, no, I just want to see the painting. Then it took me another 5 days to beg him to actually allow me to take it down from the wall and photograph it, etc. So, it takes time. You have to sort of, work as a detective to...
Which very much this detective work is what every single one of you did. I mean, with going back to find the maternal, the grandmother's house, going back to find the epic stories, Ashil Gorky's hometown, the photographs, the Armenian photographs and Armenian painting. I mean, it's this detective work which takes you back to the place, and I think what became very important from all five of you is this idea of the place of the house, the place of the epic story, the place of the painter's birth, experiences, the place of the photograph, the place of the painting, and it's something maybe we need to discuss over some drinks and in more detail. But I think we're all getting hot and thirsty, so I would like to thank our one has disappeared, our 5 speakers. So if we could give you a round of applause. And thank you for coming here and showing your support and enthusiasm for the project. Thank you. So we'll get the drinks and nibbles ready.
May I ask you, please, if you're interested in this, and I want to thank you again for organising this fantastic afternoon. Please leave your emails, your names, join the Armenian Institute if you care to, and we will contact you about other events. We have a Facebook page, Armenian Institute. You can like us, as we like you.
Did you manage to capture it? Yes, I think it's all recorded, so I'll send it, edit it a bit and send it off to... That's fantastic. It worked very well, didn't it? I felt very good about it, yes. It's Melton, isn't it? It's Melton. Melton, so we can meet until when are you at Burbank?
Till the end of May.
Sorry, middle of May?
End of May.
End of May.
I was going to speak to you about this project because I'm doing a very interdisciplinary work on monuments now this time. And so
Monuments in Turkey.
Monuments in Turkey. Period, critical period, national period. So I was wondering what you're doing more about the project.
The project, so in relation to the, I'm looking more in photography.
What is the time period?
Sorry?
What is the time period?
For this project,
late to but also very interested in